A mystery parcel at the back door. Well, no, not exactly. I knew it was coming. What do we got here? Okay, so we've got a shutter. Synchro Compur, I'd say, by the looks of it. This one's come from a Linhof camera, as you can see, and the owner opened it up to have a look. Immediately the main drive here ring popped out of place and he couldn't get it back, and the main problem of course is this little arm here which couples to the self-timer or delay action. So this I'm going to strip and clean because he opened it up for a reason. It wasn't working right to start off with. So you can see here it's a bit dirty and greasy at spots like this. The blades don't look wonderful. Certainly it can benefit from a service. I don't think I've done one of these large shutters for a while, so it could be entertaining. So my project for the day will be to strip this shutter down, clean it, lubricate it as appropriate, put it back together and return it in good proper going order again. Let's hope I can get it right. Well, I suppose it would be useful to see if this thing actually functions in some sort of way before I strip it down completely. That spring there sits oddly, that's sticking up and I suspect that's damaged. I'm at a bit of a disadvantage. I don't normally work on these larger shutters. That spring does stick up at an odd angle. Concerned about that. Alright, so I'm just going to disconnect the spring from the main lever here. Swing this into position like that. Check that that's down. That's the B lever there, I think. Yep, I've got that back in the park position. See if I can connect its spring back over the post. That looks good. The only thing I'm concerned about is the state of this spring here. It looks very odd there. I think that's bent in some fashion. We'll see if the shutter speed cameraing will fit in place. Yeah, that spring certainly pops up and it's likely to cause problems. I don't see any reason for that to be sitting up there. That's probably damaged, but anyway, without putting the front on, let's see if this goes. This would probably be a tenth of a second, I think. That's a bit fast for that, isn't it? Let's see. Well, the B's not working. The B setting's not working. That suggests that that spring is incorrectly placed. It should be somewhere else. I don't think it should be there. No, I've got to find out where the end of that spring's supposed to be. It's sticking up in the air. It's obviously going to get damaged there. It must be intended to hook onto something. Yeah, I'll have to study some drawings of this shutter, I think. But the shutter appears to basically function. The retard gear train doesn't seem to be falling in correctly. And the shutter's not latching in the open position, mind you. What have I got set here? So, what faults have we got? Well, we've got that spring popped up out of place, which will need to be, I need to discover where that came from and get it back in shape. But the shutter certainly looks like it'll go back together. I'm not concerned about that. And normally I would expect this piece, this goes on, there should be 3 small screws with this, which hold that all together. They were promised. I've got one of them. Got to find its 2 mates. There's a reasonable likelihood that one of the screws have found their way out through the hole in the bottom of this box. Or they're in the foam. But there's 2 more screws like this to find. In an ideal world, I suppose they would have been. Yeah, here it is. There's the 3rd one. So they are sitting here. Just one of them had come loose. That's good. Nothing missing. 1 spring bent. Probably that's all. Probably. The shutter will just need to be stripped and cleaned apart from that. Just run that screw back into there so it's not lost. Yes, this cover plate would go on there. Rotate to that position, then that lock would be turned. So the release isn't latching in place. Oh, the aperture setting is exceptionally stiff. One of 2 things is going on there. Either it is stiff because it's gummed up with oil on the blades. That's most likely. It's possible that the shutter's been dropped. If the shutter's been dropped, it might mean that the whole shutter is pancaked closer together than it should be, and that there's just less space for that blades to move. Right, that looks like that's going to be an interesting project. More later. I have the Synchro Compur here. Obviously this has come from a Linhof camera. Now this one is actually came to me, it wasn't completely assembled when it came to me because the owner had a little look and ended up with the cocking ring out and couldn't get it back in. But it's assembled at the moment. I put it back together. and I'm just checking over its general state. One of the things I noticed about this was that the aperture setting here was very stiff. Now the blades have got quite a bit of oil or dirt on them by the looks of it. When I get to this stage, closing them up, I can see a patch here. Now that's rust. So there's obviously been, a spot of moisture or something's been on there at some stage, I would say. That aperture is far stiffer to move than I would normally expect it to be. The shutter does fire. On the slower speeds it was a little bit reluctant to behave. It's working quite well today. The blades look a bit dirty. Certainly it will benefit from being stripped and cleaned, I would say. So that's my task basically, is to strip this thing down, completely clean everything, special attention to those diaphragm blades at the back, and put it back together again, and hopefully it'll work better than it currently does. So I'll start at the beginning. First thing I want to do, I think, is remove this. I don't know if I need to remove that cover plate or not actually. I think I can just probably unlock that and take the whole ring off there. Let's have a look. Just rotate that lock out the way and see if this will come off in one piece. Yes, it will. So that's just the name trim ring on mounted on the front there. What have we got in here? We've got our shutter speed cam plate here, and it has this odd spring that sticks up. And as you rotate the shutter speed cam plate round, that hits against that ledge there. And of course this would be held down normally by the plate on the top, and that would pull that spring round, which is interesting. That's a bit of an odd feature. I don't exactly know what that thing does, but obviously it's something interesting. One of the things about this shutter is that you can open the blades for viewing, but that is very stiff. That's so that you can focus your image on the ground glass, etc. That's very stiff. Anyway, I'll lift this shutter speed cam plate off. Nothing particularly unusual about the look of that. And at this stage I've got to take great note of where all the springs and various things fit. I've got no problem with this area around here. That's pretty straightforward and there's not an awful lot going on. But over here, where the flash sink arrangement runs, there's quite a few little levers and springs, and I do have to take great care to make sure I note where each of these little springs hook up to, which end of the spring goes where and what it's pulling on, because very likely I'll have to disassemble this completely in order to get the shutter down, and I'll need to know where all of those springs go back again. So I will take some very detailed photos of this, and then I'll start disassembling it, and I'll just take photos as I go. Well, having taken some photos of the mechanism around here, I'm going to remove the cocking ring here from the inside. Now there's a single spring here hooked over that post. I'll see if I can get it off the post without breaking my tweezers. And lift the cocking ring out. Now this is not dissimilar to the cocking ring in the smaller Compurs. The feature to notice here is this little arm at this point. That arm couples with the self-timer or delay action, and it makes it a bit tricky to get this thing back in place. Right, with that out of the way, I can look at the rest of the mechanism, and I can see the complexities down here. That's to do with the flash, and I'll need to get more photos of that before I disassemble any of this stuff here. Got to take note of the position of all of these springs. There's a little spring bearing on this arm here. That arm is loose, it looks like it lifts out. So I've got to make note of where that spring is. There's another spring underneath that, which either goes on that arm, around the bush on that arm, or below it. So I've got to take note of where the ends of that spring go. Round here I have a spring at this point acting on this lever and mounted on here, and there's another lever under here which also has some spring tension on it, but I'm not sure where that's getting it from. There's another spring further down. It must be attached to that. And this spring here is the return spring for the main shutter release lever. I can see that much. So I'll take some more photos and start lifting more parts off. I'll start with this lever. I'm going to unhook that spring from underneath it. And this lever I think will lift off. It does. No complexities there. Just checking where its spring goes and where it fits. It fits on there, and that looks like it would easily be lost, so I'm just going to get a picture of that before I go any further. This spring here that sticks up in the air that concerned me so much before, I'm looking to see where its ends go. One end of it is obviously here, the other end is here, acting against this arm. So I'll unhook that. That's no longer under tension. Seeing if that spring wants to lift off the post. Yeah, if I lift it back that way it will. I can unhook that spring, put that carefully to one side. I can't afford to lose any of these components of course because I have no spares for this shutter. This little lever on the top has a return spring here. I'll unhook that return spring. And remove that lever. I'll undo the screw that holds it in place. Lift that lever off. This lever here below it has its own return spring. I've got to see how that fits. I'll unhook that. See if I can encourage this lever off. Now this lever here has its own return spring, and the return spring is this one here. So I need to unhook that from wherever it's sitting. It's sitting tucked under that speed train, so unhook that. That's now floating loose. and remove its spring, its screw. Lift that piece off. There's an odd piece of metal here. I'm not sure what its purpose is. It may have been that was... It's got two holes in it. It may have been that one was a positioning point for a spring or something. It's interesting that should be right near that post there. I wonder whether it should have actually been on that post. The shutter release lever itself, that shall probably lift off now if I unhook its spring from that post. There's it fits there. That can come off. And I'm just about ready to take this flash sink mechanism off here. Now I've got a screw here and a screw there, and the main spring here drives the pallets in here that provide us with our timing. So okay, let's be in this screw first. That's quite a long screw. Now this screw here, I've got a screwdriver that'll get onto that. This one might. I'll unhook the spring from here so that it's not under tension. I should be able to remove that screw completely with a bit of luck. And the lever. The spring, this spring here is the high speed spring. That's just sitting there at the moment. This spring here, let's pull this back out. This spring here is just wriggled into position. I can probably lift this cover off now. It's probably sitting on a post, it is. I'll lift that off. Now the flash contact's lifted off with that. That's unfortunate because I didn't see exactly where that was seated. I suspect it was seated here. Yeah, and it would have been on the mechanism plate. Let's remove that high speed spring. So the contact would have sat there. Would have had this bush on top of it and then this plate fitted on top of that. That's not unlike other shutters of a similar nature. Now the position of the arms here and here. That's important to get these meshed correctly and I think from memory this is very much like another shutter I've done. I'll get a picture of this now so that I have a record of the current position, which may or may not actually be the correct position. But it'll serve as a good starting point. I'll unhook the spring from the post here, if I can get it to play the game. No, it's, yeah, there it is. I can probably lift this arm off now. Yeah, it doesn't want to lift up. That's better. Can wriggle that out. Lift off the pallet wheel there, or the gear that drives the pallet wheel. The pallet wheel here stays in place. This piece stays in place. There's a lever here that engages the pallets. That's got its own return spring on over at this side. That's I'll need a picture of that. And that's mostly because that spring's going to have to come out before I split the case, because it bears against the case and it's mounted on the mechanism plate, so it's going to have to come out before I move that. This little tab here which holds the return spring, I very much suspect that should have been sitting on that post there previously. When I reassemble it I'll see if that's the case. Around here, got my flash contact here, that's going to have to come out. But these levers here, or this is the lever that opens and shuts the blades for viewing. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that mechanism, so I'm going to have to take great care. There's a few springs and bits and pieces in there I'll need to take note of. I'll remove that flash contact first, because that at least is straightforward. So this mechanism here, well, there's a return spring at this point. There's a return spring on this lever. Right, bit by bit and piece by piece. I'll get some more photos.